if you look at the world poverty clock, the DRC has overtaken Nigeria with 71.2 million people living in extreme poverty, and Nigeria has 70.8 million people. Those two countries, they have large deposits of mineral resources, but yet they are going to what? Account for 40% of people living in extreme poverty by 2050. So please, can you load my slides, please? Okay. Now, if you look at the slides, Nigeria has accumulated a trade deficit of $137.33 billion between 2014 and date. The last time we had trade deficit was in 1981, 13.96 billion from 1981 to 1983. And we suffered that trade deficit and the end of the oil boom for 23 years. But this is the thing. I tell people the problem has not started. Now, we've been recording trade deficits since 2014, accumulated to 137.33 billion US dollars. Now, Mr. Kola Adesina made a statement with all the promises of the talk he gave, but he made a statement that I held on to. He said, if you export more than you import, you will become what? Prosperous. And if you import more than you export, you can never become prosperous. So what is your trade deficit? Your trade deficit or balance of trade is when you import more than you export. This is the bane of all the problems we are facing. But you see, as I said earlier, my job is to help you. So what am I going to do today? I'm going to take you back to how the problem started. And the problem didn't start today. We're going to go back to 1960. Sorry, the slides? Okay. So when we discovered oil in Olubiri in Rivers State, we never concentrated on crude oil. In fact, agriculture accounted for 54.7% of our export and 75% of our external earnings, which meant that we were very productive. We were a very productive nation. We worked the farm, we harvested, and we sold and we exported. So we never depended on one particular commodity to give us what? To give us the external earnings, which is the US dollars. We had the granite pyramids of Kano, we had the cocoa in the southwest, and we had the oil palms in the southeast. We were prosperous. Productivity. Now, next slide, please. If you look at the graph, you'll find out one thing. Our GDP increased from 4.2 billion in 1960 to 6.63 billion in 1969. The only time it reduced was 67 and 68. Why? The Civil War, right? By 1969, even while the Civil War had not ended, the 1969 GDP had overtaken the 1966 GDP. But guess what? All this happened even while crude oil prices what? Dropped from $1.63 in 1960 to $1.27 in 1969. So we had a 22.1% decrease in crude oil prices and 58% increase in what? In our GDP. We were growing. Productivity. So basically what happens is that in a productive economy, recessions don't last too long. Because what? You have products that are needed. But all that changed from the 70s. Next slide, please. So what changed it? In 1973, you need to take notes because most of you, Mr. Omole said, you know, about, is this 61 or 69% of the population now were born after when? Good. So most of you don't even know this. This is the bane of the problem we're facing today. Now, this was where Nigeria's problem started from. In 1973, so what is the Yom Kippur War? The Arab nations ganged up, like what is happening now in Gaza, right? They ganged up and attacked Israel. While they attacked Israel, the U.S. supported them. The U.S. supported Israel, right? And to punish Israel, they ganged up and said, sorry, to punish the U.S. rather, they ganged up and said they were not going to sell crude oil to the United States and the West. Now, what was driving up the cost of crude oil then? The U.S. depended on crude oil for its industrialization. And because of that ban to export crude oil to the U.S., what basically happened was that the U.S. turned to countries, the Western world turned to countries like Nigeria to fill in that gap. And next slide. And because of that, crude oil jumped from $1.27 in 1970. By 1974, it was $11. For those of us who are old enough, this was when the sitting head of state made the famous statement that money was not our problem, but what? How to spend it. Now, when money comes from hard work, of sweat and productivity, you will know how to invest it. You will know that you don't have to spend frivolously. When you sleep at 1 a.m. and wake up at 4, you will know that you have to invest for the rainy days. Sometimes I get home like 10, I sleep for like 2 hours, I wake up 12, and I work till 3 a.m. You want to tell me if I make money, I will throw it around anyhow? Kole jebe. So, what was the implication of this? Nigeria switched from what is called a productive economy to a rent-seeking economy. So what is rent-seeking? Rent-seeking is an economic concept that occurs when an entity seeks to gain added wealth without any reciprocal contribution of what? Productivity. And I'll say this. You see all this banditry, all this stuff we're facing today, ain't gonna stop. I'll be very honest with you. I'll read something to you. There are 5 or 6 consequences of a rent-seeking economy. 1, reduced economic efficiency through misallocation of resources. You see that happening in Nigeria, doesn't it? 2, reduced wealth creation. The gap between the rich and poor is huge. 3, lost government revenue. We are not interested in collecting IGRs, right? We just want to sell oil and share. 4, heightened income inequality. You have the high and mighty, and you have the lows. And then the last one, which scares me, potential national decline. We will continue on that trajectory until we go back to productivity. You can never find a person who is productive and stupid, or who is productive and useless. Next slide, please. So, this is your crude oil price. I'm going to help you identify some certain things. Now, apart from 1960 to 1969, every other place you see a red, right, is a year. 1974, $11, 1980, $35, 1990, $22. These are when some major events happened. I'll crack a joke. 2 angels were watching down while people were praying around 5 a.m. And as the 2 angels were listening, one said, where's that continent? The other one said, oh, it's Africa. Yeah, but that country. Said, oh, it's Nigeria. So where is he praying from? Well, that place is called Asorok. So why is he praying for war? So the other angel now said, oh, no. He's not praying for war for his people. He's praying for war in the Middle East. Like, why? Well, he's been in office for like 3 years, and people seem he's not doing anything. So So without war in the Middle East, its economy can't grow. It's a joke, right? But it's the truth. You see, go back to the slide, please. You see, all these years where you have growth, right? Go and look at the trajectory. You find out that there's one major war or destabilization in the Middle East that causes the oil not to flow to the West, and then the forces of demand and supply comes in, and as the forces of demand and supply comes in, what? But the end of the joke was this. The other angel now said, well, we answered his prayer, but we're not going to give him quantities. Now, there are two things that have always determined the success of one. But those two things have two factors that have always determined the success of any administration, head of state, government, and anybody in power in Nigeria. The price and quantities of crude oil. If price is on your side, you will seem as if you are doing something good. Go to the next slide after that. I want to explain something. Now, this is your GDP, right? You see that the graphs have the same trajectory, right? That tells you that crude oil determines everything you do in Nigeria. If price is on your side and quantities is on your side, you will seem as if you are performing in office. You will boast, oh, my economy had 7% growth. So when any leader comes to you and say, oh, we had this GDP, we had that GDP, we had this growth, ask them what was the price of crude oil and what quantities did you sell? Did you develop any product that you exported? Did you support the local manufacturing industries? What policies did you bring up to ramp up local manufacturing? Most of them, they don't have it. They simply don't. So let's go on. So now, can we bypass this? We'll come back to it, please. Okay. No, next slide, please. Okay. Now, so because of the demand from the industrialized West and the subsequent wars in the Middle East, oil price remained relatively high till 1979. And in 1979, another event will happen, the return of the Ayatollah. So in 1979, the Ayatollah overthrew the Shia of Iran. Iran used to be a very moderate, liberal country until the Ayatollah came back, overthrew the Shia. The people during the revolution, they overturned the US embassy, held 66 people hostage, and then I think 54 of them were held for over a year. That was why Jimmy Carter lost in the 1979 election and Reagan came in. And that is the bane of the two countries' relationship till tomorrow, because America felt like they were humiliated by the Iranians. So oil cut off from Iran to the West again. And what happened afterwards? Go to the next slide, please. Oil jumped up to what? To $35.32 from just $1.21 in 1970. Who won't do hard work when somebody can be paying you? You just give your oil wells to the multinationals. They pay you royalty every month. You sleep, you wake up by 12. You put gin and juice on your side, and you sip, and you can steal a little bit of naira, a little bit of dollars, and stash them abroad. That was what all our leaders started doing. So basically, what did they do? Between 1979 and 1983, when the military came in, right? No, please, don't go to this slide yet. You know how Fela will say, they use big grammar to confuse you. Misadministration, maladministration, and all that stuff, right? All what they were doing was stealing. In fact, 16 billion between 1979 and 1983 that got missing. So, you see, when wealth is not from productivity, it is not sustainable. And it is productivity that provides the solid foundation to retain and multiply wealth. Easy come, easy go.